Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to I would say, the second webinar on the demand-side subsidies, which is a series of webinars carried out by the End User Subsidy Lab. This is a subsidy lab in partnership between GOGLA, Clean Cooking Alliance, EnDev, and ESMAP. We have actually focused on 4 pilot countries: Liberia, Malawi, Uganda. And other one is Niger or Zambia. I'm forgetting. Niger, right? Niger, yes. Niger. Yes. So those are the four countries that we picked up, and we carried out some pilots. The previous webinar was on demand-side subsidies for electrification for off-grid solar, which was quite exciting. And today's one, I would say, is more exciting because the topic is more elusive. It's elusive the way I compare, because I have the opportunity to work on both electrification and clean cooking solutions. The way I look at them is, when you try to promote electrification, you actually reach out to people who don't have access to electricity. So you are trying to convince people that a solar home system, a solar light, is much, much better than a kerosene lamp or a hurricane or compared to darkness. So I think it's a kind of an easier sell, though it's pricey and people have to jump from let's say not using electricity to start using electricity. The reason I find clean cooking is more difficult is because almost everybody cooks. There's not a single household which doesn't cook. I mean, as long as they can afford to cook, of course, but they cook. Some sort of cooking happens. So it's not from electricity from total darkness to light. It's not that from not cooking to cooking. Everybody cooks, and then everybody gets attached to their behavior, the flavor, the taste that they get from home cooking, and then convincing them to transition from current level of cooking, which could be detrimental to their health, to the air they breathe in, or to the environment that they live in, is significantly better. It's often much harder than one would think. So this is why today's topic is very interesting to me, and I'm sure you all have joined here to learn how the lessons from pilots can help you design your projects. Today we will hear from EnDev, who has carried out this pilot in 2 countries, Malawi and Uganda. It's a pilot. The pilot that they carried out was from 2022 to 2025. And I think it's about 20 million euros spread across the 4 pilot countries. In Malawi and Uganda, we'll hear from them how they designed demand-side subsidies to stimulate clean cooking market. What worked, what didn't work. I think that's the most important thing. And again, the Malawi and Uganda are very different countries. The country's setup is different. Probably people's behaviors are different. The target customers could also be different. So I'm sure there's a lot of lessons to learn from. I'm sure even my bank colleagues, World Bank colleagues, will also benefit, because as part of the Mission 300, where we are trying to electrify 300 million people in partnership between World Bank and African Development Bank, plus there are other donor partners supporting us, Rockefeller, SC4All, GF, and others are there as well. In the bank, while we are counting the number of people electrified, as part of the Mission 300 Compact, the governments have also included clean cooking targets. So clean cooking targets is also part of World Bank program, which comes through the Mission 300, comes through the broader discussion on compacts and so forth. So without further ado, I would hand it back to Marty from EnDev and listen to their presentation and their experience. Before I finish, I would just like to realize that I haven't introduced myself. I'm Raihan Elahi. I lead the Energy Access Program in ESMAP in the World Bank, and many of my colleagues are present here. I'm just apologizing from all of you because I won't be at the end of the session. My colleague Charlie Miller has agreed to convey the closing remarks. With that, I'm handing it over to Marty.
Thank you very much, Ryan. And hello, everyone. My name is Meerte van der Spek. I am part of the global team that coordinated the Demand-Side Subsidy component across the 4 countries for the past 4 years. Before diving into the Subsidy Lab, I would like to quickly go through the agenda of today and present our panelists and speakers. So next slide, please. Thanks. So we mixed up a little bit. We had the opening remarks. We have 4 people that joined us today to share their experience about demand-side subsidies in the cookstove market. They are Madalitso Lundu, who is our EnDev colleague in Malawi, Angel Babazi, who is our colleague in Uganda. Then we are joined today by Gift Mwazi, who is the CEO of Namulleri Energy in Malawi. And we are very happy that Justine Akumu joins us today, who works for the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development in Uganda. I will, after this, quickly share a little bit about the End User Subsidy Lab for those who are not aware of the lab, the DSS pilot, and then I am pleased to hand over the microphone to my Malawi colleague to share about the pilot in Malawi. Mara will shed both light on the solar component and the cooking component. Then over to Angel. She will do the same for Uganda. Then there is room for questions. If you have questions, either type them in the chat or raise your hand after the 2 presentations. And then the bulk of the webinar, we will spend about the main lessons learned on DSS, so demand-side subsidies or end-user subsidies in the cookstove market with our implementers and the panelists that join us today. Technique. Thanks. So the End User Subsidy Lab is a partnership between GOGLA, ESMAP, EnDev, and the Clean Cooking Alliance. And we try to generate any knowledge, best practices, and insights on demand-side or end-user subsidies. We use them intertwined. You can use them both. And these webinars are part of it, but there's also tools on how to design responsible subsidies, etc. So for more information, please do join the Subsidy Lab website or reach out to any of us. Thanks, Sagnik. Then indeed, the demand-side subsidy component. It's a 20 million component that was developed to facilitate access to modern energy service, both off-grid and clean cooking for low-income or displaced populations, so people who are currently not reached by commercial markets. And the overarching aim of the pilot was to contribute to the global learning and knowledge sharing of end-user subsidies, but also to provide recommendations for future replication and scale. And thereby we worked closely with the colleagues from ESMAP and the World Bank and the other Subsidy Lab colleagues. I am very happy to share that today's webinar focuses on what happens when demand-side subsidies are introduced in cookstove markets. Ryan already said it's tricky. That's a spoiler perhaps, but probably not one you did not expect. Malawi and Uganda showed that demand-side subsidies can help to address affordability barriers, but that the cookstove sector faces a distinct set of challenges, and that getting them right requires more than just well-designed subsidy mechanisms. So with this, I would like to hand over to my colleague Madalitso to share about his demand-side subsidy pilot in Malawi.
Thank you, Muta. My name is Madalitso, as already introduced, and maybe without much ado, I'll take you through the implementation of demand-side subsidies in Malawi. The budget for the pilot was 4.8 million euros, with funding coming from the Dutch Directorate General for International Cooperation. The goal was addressing affordability barrier for households that are in ultra-poor settings, especially those that would not be reached by the commercial market. All right, I was requested to turn on my camera, but unfortunately my network is not that good. The target population were the households classified as poor and poorest per the Malawi Social Registry, which classified the households into 5 income levels. So in there we have poor, poorest, better off, poor and rich. So we are targeting the bottom 2, poorest and poor. Technologies that were supported included improved cookstoves, particularly the clay-based chitetezo mbaula, and also off-grid solar products, those with 3 lights or more. In Malawi, we had a dual fund manager arrangement with Self-Help Africa and Cure Microfinance Limited as our fund managers. And as Muta already highlighted, we're engaging with World Bank, particularly Malawi Electricity Access Program, both phase 1 and phase 2. And our sales have been stopped in May 2026. Next slide, please. Now to the incentive structure, the way how our incentives were structured. So for off-grid solar products, households that were in poorer category of the Malawi Social Registry were allocated a subsidy level of about 73% of the average market price. The remainder 27% was now the customer contribution towards the purchase of the product. Similar, so the poorest households had a subsidy level of 88% of the average market price, and the remainder was what the customer was paying, either on cash or on pay-as-you-go. Now to cook stoves, the average market price was subsidized by 85% for households that are in the poorer Malawi Social Registry categorization, and 89% for households that are in the poorest categorization. So in there, we also included a distribution or a supply cost of initially about 1.8 euro, which was later revised to around 2.52, following the increase in the fuel prices and also the transportation cost. Next slide, please. And still moving ahead with the approach, you might maybe have questions as to how we are identifying the customers that are in poor and poorest categories. So we are using an eligibility tool by the name Kobo, which was then used to screen the customers and identify which one are eligible. And then Kobo was also used to determine the subsidy level for each customer category. And subsidy were delivered using the results-based financing mechanism, where now funds were channeled through the fund manager to the implementing companies upon verification of results by a third party. So this verification included phone calls, either field visits, and also desk review. And this was done prior to the disbursement of the incentives to the suppliers. Next slide, please. Now moving ahead with our results at the moment, households that have been reached totaling to 170,000, and these have been reached with modern energy access, thus combining both off-grid solar and also improved cook stoves. But breaking the figure down, for improved cook stoves, we've reached about 112,000 households. And with off-grid solar products, we've reached about 58,348 households, supporting around 24 renewable energy companies. Next slide, please. And diving into the key challenges which we encountered during implementation, the first and the foremost when it comes to the off-grid solar was the forex shortage. So this constrained the supply of off-grid solar systems because the pilot was meant to, or was planned to reach or to be completed in June 2025. But then with the forex shortages, it meant that companies were supposed to rely only on one in-country supplier. And as such, when the supplier was having challenges providing the stock, then also companies were having delays in implementation, which led to reaching 2026. When it comes to improved cook stoves, transport challenge was a big headache for us because the cook stove being promoted is quite bulky, clay-based, and this was experienced especially during the rainy season where roads were very bad, and as such, this limited availability of products in the target areas. Also, before implementation of the project, we noted that there was limited household awareness of the Malawi Social Registry classification, which risked social tension. So when we realized that, we intensified communication, sensitization through district councils and also community leaders for them to be aware of the category which they are classified, and also for them to understand, assuming that maybe they haven't gotten the product, what was the reason behind getting the product under the DSS. Next slide, please. And to key lessons and also insights from the implementation in Malawi, the first is that timely incentive disbursements are essential to maintain liquidity of the companies that are implementing or selling the products under the pilot, as this ensures that they are achieving targets timely as well. And also, we noticed that a blended demand-side and supply-side mechanism is required to reach the ultra-poor households, assuming that still the product to be promoted is the Bake improved cook stoves Chitetezo Mbaula. So there is need still to provide supply-side subsidies in that essence for the product to reach the market. Also, one of the lessons learned was that involving local authorities, including district councils and also village leaders, promoted trust, accountability, and also communities accepted the program quickly. They understood the mechanism and also the UPR, rather the Malawi Social Registry classification. And when they were excluded, they could understand the reasoning behind that. So that's the insights from Malawi. Now handing over back to Muta. Over to you, Muta.
Thank you very much, Mada. Thank you. I will ask our colleague Angel now to present the Uganda pilot prior to we move into questions.
Thank you so much, Meta. Also, kindly allow me keep my camera off due to also poor network connections here. Thank you. My name is Angel Mbabazi, Energy Advisor, GSN Uganda, also supporting the implementation of Demand-Side Subsidy pilot in Uganda. I'll also take you through how the pilot was designed in Uganda, as well as some of our challenges, key achievements, and some of the learnings that could support future DSS designs. As already highlighted, the pilot was designed with an objective of improving access to modern energy technologies among vulnerable populations that are also often excluded from commercial markets. For the pilot in Uganda, we specifically targeted refugees and host community households, plus other low-income households, also with a strong focus in northern Uganda and other parts of western Uganda, where also energy poverty remains high. Our targeting was guided by both geographical and demographic criteria, also guided by the Multinational Poverty Index and the Uganda Bureau of Statistics results on poverty levels within the country. So supported technologies were solar off-grid in clean cooking. Under solar off-grid, we supported solar lanterns with charging option and tier 1 solar home systems. For clean cooking, we supported improved cook stoves, modern energy stoves, electric pressure cookers, and ethanol stoves. The project was implemented close collaboration with the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development. Private Sector Foundation Uganda served as a fund manager who was also coordinating the private sector companies. So under the pilot, we aligned on the subsidies with the World Bank funded electricity access scale-up project that is implemented by Uganda Energy Credit Capitalization Company. So the sales in Uganda continued until March 2026. Next slide. Thank you. So the subsidy levels in Uganda were carefully designed to also improve affordability for the vulnerable households, also ensuring that we maintain commercial incentives for participating companies. So the subsidy values were determined based also on affordability assessment and willingness to pay assessment that was conducted. For solar technologies, the subsidy ranged from 52 to 68% discount, and for cooking, the subsidy ranged from 42 to 67% discount. Also, this highly depended on the different product type. We adopted a results-based financing model. Here, contracted companies sold product at a subsidized price and also recovered the subsidy after verification. 12 clean cooking companies were contracted, and 8 solar companies were contracted. Also, companies were contracted through an open competitive expression of interest, and as well following the expression of interest, an extensive due diligence was done on the companies before contracts were signed. So to also address some liquidity constraints for the contracted companies, a 30% advance payment was made. 30% of the contract value was made to the contracted companies, and 70% released only after sales had been independently verified. Also, verification was done by an independent verification agent, and this was typically initiated after about 3,000 sales have been made, but also this remained flexible during the project implementation, also depending on the implementation progress. So we used the COBO eligibility COBO toolbox to check eligible households to ensure that the customer resided within an eligible district. Also ensure that the customer has not already bought a similar product category, but also minimize any sort of duplication or double benefit or double substitution of the product. So also beyond the subsidies, the project supported companies with market awareness. Sales agents and local leaders received capacity building support, mostly on the general project understanding, built their product knowledge, some bit of customer engagement and beneficiary targeting. This was also complemented by additional awareness campaigns that included food drives, live product demonstrations, radio talk shows to improve general understanding of the project, also ensure target beneficiaries received the communications. Next slide. Thank you. This is an overview of the project achievement. Generally, the project successfully reached 181,089 people, significantly extending access to modern energy services for the most vulnerable target populations. One notable achievement here was the strong uptake of the solar products within the refugee settlements. A total of 43,498 solar units were distributed to refugee households. Also, for clean cooking, we saw high adoption in the host communities. Next slide. So beyond the subsidies, beyond the financial support that was provided to the companies, so also beyond the numbers, we saw that many participating companies extended beyond their traditional urban markets and established operations in remote last mile areas where they had previously had limited presence. A few of the companies established outlets within the target locations, also established partnerships and extended their reach within the target market. We saw the participating companies with the capacity building support provided. This strengthened their institutional capacity, mostly also built their implementation experience having been in these markets. I think lastly, on the achievements, I think another important achievement was the innovative financing mechanism. The companies improvised additional financing to ensure that the beneficiaries, the target beneficiaries, acquired the products. We saw that even with the reduced or the discount provided, many households still struggled to pay for the remaining cost in full. So companies improvised credit purchases or further installments to ensure that the beneficiaries acquire the target or adopt modern energy. Next slide. Some of the key challenges here. So, well, despite the project success, few challenges or a number of challenges, and notably was the high last mile distribution cost, and this really looks into the poor road network, long transport distances, the limited logistical capacity. This really increased the delivery costs, more especially in the refugee settlements. That's some of the low numbers that were seen in the refugee market. Another key challenge, this was more specific to clean cooking, was the previous free handouts that had been made previously by some other humanitarian organization. So this really affected customer expectations and reduced their willingness to purchase products commercially. Still, the affordability gap remains that despite the subsidies that were provided, some households were still or could still not be able to pay the remaining balance. Also specifically affected by the huge funding cuts and additional seasonality of the income streams for most of the rural communities. Another key challenge was the operational differences for both solar and clean cooking. So we saw that also under clean cooking, since most of the stoves are bulkier and more difficult to transport than the solar products, this made distribution considerably more expensive for clean cooking, and that's slow uptake. Awareness gaps still remain a significant challenge. Thus, more continuous investment in awareness creation is key. Some of the lessons learned or key learnings during the implementation were that demand-side subsidies are effective, but also are not sufficient on their own. Financial support must be complemented by additional support for the companies, market development, financial innovations, extensive awareness, strong implementation partnerships, like linkages with the community-based organizations to ensure easier access and reduced implementation costs. Program design should also be flexible and technology specific, like we saw challenges with the challenges with the clean cooking vis-a-vis the solar side. So technology specific that would be more preferred while designing the program. We also saw that solar and clean cooking markets operate specific. They are quite different, with the solar market a bit more developed than the cooking market. Thus requires more tailored approaches. But also when it comes to serving refugees and host communities, this will also require different operational realities. Liquidity management is key while implementing the results-based demand-side subsidies. Under the pilot, some advance payment was provided. However, this was also not very sufficient. So we strongly encourage building in additional financial linkages and swift reimbursement to ensure companies maintain their liquidity during implementation. And also, finally, the legal leaders were very supportive during the project implementation. They helped to build the trust and also supported in mobilization of the target beneficiaries and ensure that the target beneficiaries received the communication. This is the last slide, and thank you, and over to you, Meta.
Thank you very much. I already saw some interesting, thank you very much, Angel, for this very comprehensive overview. And I saw some very interesting questions in the chat already. I'll start with the first one, and I think maybe Gift, you are best placed to answer this question. The question is, do you have any evidence that the households continued using these technologies? So are they fully adopted? Could you give an insight on that?
All right.
And if you can, maybe please turn off on the camera. Thank you so much.
Yes, let me do that. Thank you. I'm Gift Mwase. I'm the CEO of Malawi and Uganda. So I will try to respond. Yes, the households continue to use. As the presentations have highlighted, the issue has been affordability, not demand. Demand is there. People are interested to have these technologies to use them. So when they get access to them, a lot of them even appreciate them more because others wouldn't manage to get them. So what we've observed on our part, the clients continue to use the technologies. For the clean cooking technologies, like in Malawi, we are selling the improved cookstove, Chitetezo Mbaula, and yes, it's a mad one, but still people appreciate it. It saves a lot of wood, and a lot of people appreciate it, and they continue to use it. When it's broken, that's where we've seen that people have indeed transitioned, because when it's broken, they are buying replacements. So that signals that people continue to use. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gift. I see also a lot of questions about the design considerations of a demand-side subsidy and how to avoid market distortion. We, or ESMAP, has actually designed a toolkit on designing responsible end-user subsidies. This toolkit is available. Maybe I will ask Sagnik if he could copy-paste the link towards that toolkit. The DSS component was based on those designs. So I suggest we don't go into those questions for now. It also it explains the decisions that you make in terms of technologies and subsidy levels, etc. Maybe an interesting one is the consumer financing bit, either by distributors or by third parties. Angels, could you shed some light on the, I think it was Tunge example? So was there any consumer financing offered?
Yes, thank you, Meta. Specifically, consumer company innovative financing that we're referring to, the company specifically offered credit, but also the pay-go payment models that were inbuilt within the solar products. So for the other innovative financing also involved partnerships with the savings groups, where the savings groups would offer credit to the beneficiaries, but also specifically understanding between the customer and the company that they would offer credit and then payments would be made in installment basis. This was more for customers that were attached to like an organization, maybe like a school within the settlement, that would be easier for the customers, or for the company to locate the customer. but also the companies created strong network within the settlement, recruitment of local sales agents who would, in the end, be able to network properly with the customers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll do one more question, but maybe with regards to the lessons learned on ensuring that subsidy programs strengthen rather than crowd out private sector investment in local markets. We are currently undergoing a performance study implemented by OCA, and an independent evaluation is being carried out. And these will provide also insights and recommendations on how to avoid market distortion and how to, I wouldn't say strengthen local markets, but at least try to distort them as less as possible. So more on that will follow. Maybe the last question, since this is a cookstove webinar, were there any considerations on fuel stacking and in deciding who gets a stove? Mada or Angel, could you, one of you, shed some light on that? And the link to the toolkit on designing responsible subsidies was shared by Charlie. So no need to share it, Saknik. Thanks.
Right, yeah, from Malawi perspective on consideration on who gets the product, we're using the Malawi Social Registry, as already stated, which classified the population into 5 categories of income levels. So with the objective of reaching the ultra-poor households, and also looking at now the Malawi Social Registry categorization, the bottom 2 were the ones which were prioritized and also understood to be the ultra-poor households, also fitting the objective. So as such, the poor and the poorest households, as defined by the Malawi Social Registry, were the ones which were prioritized to get the product on the subsidy. And as also mentioned by Gift, other customers in the upper bands were then also able to buy the product. So more or less like creating a spillover effect based on the DSS implementation as well.
Thanks. Looking at the time, and I would also like to leave some room for our panelists, I suggest we move over now to the 3 main insights that the colleagues had on implementing demand-side subsidies in the cookstove market. Prior to that, I would like to reintroduce 2 new faces. Well, Gift, you already shared a bit, but thank you for being here. And the other one who will now join us is Justine Akumu, who works for the Uganda Uganda Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development. Thank you both for being here today. Let's dive into our first lesson. So in Malawi and Uganda, DSS reduced the end-user price, but cookstoves, as you heard, exposed a different set of challenges than solar. The issue was not only affordability, but also the bulky products, last-mile logistics, lower company maturity, weaker sales systems, and customer awareness gaps. So what did the pilots reveal about the real costs of delivering subsidized cookstoves to remote customers? So I would like to start with Gift. Could you shed some light on how much transport and logistics affect your ability to serve these remote customers?
Thank you. I think that's a very good question. Yeah, not easy. So as an energy company, we are in clean cooking, electric cooking, but we are also doing solar home systems. So then we are doing improved cookstoves. Improved cookstoves proved to be very interesting in terms of the challenges and the opportunities that they offered. Logistically, a huge headache. So just to give all of us here a good picture, for the other products that I mentioned, logistics would account for about 20% or less of the cost. For improved cook stoves, it went above 100%. So that already in itself means how we price was already challenged. We had to change the way we priced, but also because it's slightly backy. As soon as there is any shift in the fuel pricing, then already you have issues, you have problems, you have challenges because transport becomes the major and the biggest cost in doing the improved cook stove business. So the lesson for us was we really need to recognize the logistics of the cook stoves as one of the key factors that would make or scale them or even make us fail to reach the target. We managed to sell about 7,000 improved cook stoves. Our plan, we are very ambitious, Mada knows here. We wanted to do 40,000, but we really failed to do much because of a lot of logistical challenges that we faced. Yeah, so I can start like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gift. So, Angel, in Uganda as well, even with transport support, some refugee communities remained very difficult to reach. So what do you think? What does it take to serve these customer segments?
Well, thank you, Meta. With the clean cooking market also was a specific or different learnings that we had as a project. I mean, starting with first, the companies failed to post clearly for their logistical support. So from the beginning of the implementation, while the companies posted for the subsidy, they poorly posted for their products, which led to additional revisions, which was a key challenge in the implementation. But when we come to, I mean, speaking about transport support, so this was specifically provided during the awareness campaigns, but also for a predefined period and a targeted distribution route. So this was as well and not indeed throughout the implementation of the project. And we saw that with the transport support provided and coupled with the awareness campaign, massive demand was created and sales volumes were achieved during the period where transport support was provided. However, even with the achieved awareness and activated demand, the companies were unable to meet the demand. And this was specifically because of the shortage, stock shortages, limited capacity to replenish the inventory in a timely manner. So we ended up achieved demand without products to supply the market. So I would strongly say that yes, the demand side, the model is sufficient, but it's effective. A more effective approach would be a context-sensitive demand-side model that also combines a bit of targeted subsidies with strengthened distribution networks, a lot of customer awareness and engagements, plus additional linkages to financing to ensure they maintain liquidity during the implementation. So such an integrated approach would support to improve affordability for the household, but also ensuring commercial viability for the suppliers. Also, I mean, ultimately supporting sustainable market and market development, ensuring that the demand generated can still be translated into actual clean cooking sales. Thank you.
Mara, do you agree? Is a DSS only, so price production, is that not enough?
Thanks, Mute. Yeah, indeed, from my side, I would wish to agree with that point. Logistics support should have been designed as a formal program component from the onset. Now speaking from the Malawi perspective, also looking at the bargainage of the product, rising fuel costs, and also remoteness of the intervention areas, which significantly constrained effective delivery, a blended approach would have been very effective, blending both supply side and also the demand side subsidy into one. From Malawi, initially, our distribution cost or supply side subsidy per stove was around 1.8 euro, and then sales were still very slow. But when then we kept on increasing it, with reference to increases in the fuel costs and also the transportation costs, that's when now we realized that sales kept moving up and up. So indeed, I think a blended approach is needed, especially when targeting the ultra-poor households, which are very living in very remote areas. And also if we are looking at still promoting the same stove, Chitete Zombaula. Yeah, so I would agree that a blended approach is needed.
Thank you, Mara. And I think it's interesting to note that in Malawi for solar, this was not needed. Neither was it in Uganda for solar, but for the cookstove sector, the blended approach proved to be needed. Then Justine, thank you for being here. Can you say a little bit about what role, if any, should public actors play in reducing last mile delivery costs for clean cooking products?
Thank you very much for that question. And maybe just to note, and also to build up from what Angel had submitted, it speaks to the need, for improved public infrastructure. Sorry, I feel some feedback. Could it be me? Apologies. Is everything okay? Okay, great.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Yes, so that speaks to the need for, broader infrastructure development, and that cuts across the quality of roads. The good news is on the Ugandan side, especially, you find the refugee hosting communities are towards, the extreme end of the country, bordering other countries, but there's a lot of road expansion and improvement, tarmacking in some cases, or opening the roads completely to make transportation, more, again, flexible. And we have a lot of activities going in terms of extending our electricity distribution network. The Arua side, the West Nile side, is now has now been fully electrified or fully connected to the grid, to the transmission network. And in addition, there's a lot of work that's going on to improve our digital connectivity, and overall from that macro perspective, the government is doing a lot to ensure that we reduce the cost overall again, attributed to transportation, to the cost of electricity, to mention but a few. However, with regards to implementation of such programs and how we can make, again, the cost of transportation and that last mile connectivity much lower, it's very important that, my predecessors have also spoken about it, we have to recognize that, the cost of delivery in places, the capital city like Kampala, where most of the private sector is concentrated, the cost of delivery is much different when it comes to other harder to reach areas. And here we have to be realistic and embed that aspect into the incentive. And maybe just to throw that back to my colleagues who presented about the DSS and how the private companies did not quote. Were they given an opportunity to quote that cost? Did they have ample time to estimate, the logistical implication of taking their products to far to reach areas and henceforth embed that cost. I believe that was a learning curve both for the private sector and also the the program designers, and that's one of the feedback I'm taking from here. But also, one of my colleagues also spoke about it, credit support. These DSS results-based contracts are not solid enough to be used as financing instruments for the bank. And even when you need operating capital to go and, transport your products because you've been given a contract, for instance, by GIZ, the bank will tell you that there are a lot of conditions to this contract. Hence, it's not solid enough for me to use to finance. There's so much risk to it. And henceforth, the bank will probably ask you for collateral. And you need to appreciate that these are companies that do not have, especially the cookstove companies. The cookstove companies are where the solar companies were probably 15 years ago. We're dealing with, mostly smaller, relatively smaller in terms of financial muscle and even technical muscle. So those have been some of the limits. So in terms of unlocking finance, it's important that you not only provide some upfront financing where possible, but also support these companies to access financing from the bank to make sure that they can be able to facilitate the implementation of these programs. However, also looking at strengthening the local distribution ecosystems. There's a lot of work that happens in the center because most of the private sector is centered in the capital city where the demand has already been, is relatively more mature, and there is not much that's happening on the, the actual site of implementation. So it's important that we ensure that, there is a linkage, and that also supports with the after sales. What happens when the appliance needs repair? How are we working with the structures that are available to then aggregate demand and aggregate awareness and knowledge about these programs? Because oftentimes we've seen, private companies set off from the center to go to the far to reach area to target only 100 or so customers, yet there's a lot that can be done to aggregate the demand. So ensuring that you have the right awareness that is delivered on time, but also working with the local structures, the community leaders, the district local governments, the local politicians to then aim and grow the demand for these products can also help reduce that last mile cost, because you're serving a bigger proportion of the population at the time that you got to deliver. That's what I'd have to submit for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yassine. I think this is also a great introduction to the second lessons learned, which is about company maturity, which proved to be a bottleneck. And also the question that rises then, is the RBF, the results-based finance, the right mechanism to deliver subsidies in these remote areas? So, Angel, first to you. There were eligibility criteria because the subsidies were quite steep, but it also proved to be very challenging, both in Uganda and in Malawi, for the companies to adhere to these administrative requirements. Can you share a little bit about what you did when you found out?
Yes, thank you, Meta. For us, specifically, we first companies were supported with the advance payment upon contraction. After thorough due diligence had been done, the companies were supported with the advance payment to support with the implement or operational capital to minimize the implementation losses. So this also helped to set or support the companies in the initial implementation, but also extensive coordination with the companies to ensure that specific data points were collected during the implementation. Here we provided a claim form so that the companies during implementation, they know the key data points that will be required while implementing, while conducting sales. So this helped the companies, but also when it came to the data collection tool, we offered extensive trainings for the sales agents to build their digital skills, but also additional onward capacity buildings for the sales agent to ensure that they are well equipped and learned how to use the digital sales tool. That's a bit on how we did to ensure that the companies were well versed with how the results-based financing model works, but also that they really work closely with the digital eligibility tool.
Thank you very much. Gift, from the company perspective, what kind of payment rhythm and claims processes are needed to keep cookstove sales moving continuously?
Thank you. So for us, we went into this business with both of our eyes open. We kind of planned for the investment model. So what we did in the beginning was to give ourselves a cash flow buffer of 60 days. Normally, we give ourselves a 30-day buffer, but this cannot always happen. It's not always that you would be able to project your cash flow for 60 days. But also in this model, sometimes payments or claims will take longer than 60 days. So when your 60 days expire, you are in trouble. You find yourself struggling with cash flow, a lot of issues happening. And that would slow you down instead of moving the sales forward. So what we saw as something that worked, agreeing with my friend who just spoke, the advance payments. The advance payments were also very helpful because they kind of create some cash flow runway for us to make sure that we run a few things a little bit smoothly. But in our case, they were based on the claim. When you submit a claim, you've made all the sales, then you get a portion in advance. At the beginning, it was a smaller portion, and we pushed, and it got to about 60% for the cookstove side of the business. And that one really worked well for us because in the beginning, as a company, we were shouldering a lot of upfront costs and a lot of risk on our own. Then we would claim later on. And we also learned in the whole process. Now, the cookstove market is largely different with the solar home systems market. We had the advantage of being in the solar home systems side of the program and also in the cookstove side of the business. Madalis would agree with me. We did very well in the solar side of the business. But when it came to the cookstove, we kind of struggled because the dynamics are largely different. So when you take on a lot of risk as a business, it kind of slows you down. If the advance payment is maybe, let's say, 20%, 40%, it means the business is shouldering 60% of all the costs. And now it's in a market that the costs are slightly higher, the margins are slightly smaller. So you find that it's becomes a little bit complicated. For us, moving forward, would say as programs or projects that are being designed, RBF is the right vehicle to reach to the most needed in the communities. As a business, there are other places that we've gone to just because the spaces were de-risked. Without the de-risking of the spaces, we wouldn't go there because it wouldn't make business sense. And also the subsidy levels, but also the reimbursements and the claims, how they were working. If they worked in a cycle of 45 days max, would have been best, because many of the companies, as you know, we are smaller businesses. 30 days is a natural kind of invoice period that we would give. Now to go maybe beyond 30 days to 60 days, sometimes maybe closer to 90 days, kind of becomes a chokehold. You know you have money, but the money is not with you. You can't do anything with that. And as Justine pointed out, banks don't work with that. You wouldn't go to a bank, I'm waiting for this. Yes, sometimes it would work, but not always. So if the process of claims, verifications, and everything was kind of sped up a bit, was done maybe in between 30 to 45 days, I think that would also speed up the sales that companies were making. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kev. So, Justine, all these challenges point to wider structural needs in the cookstove sector. What is the Ugandan government doing to strengthen the market?
One of the things we are looking at is to come up with a centralized platform for MRV. You find different subsidy programs all come with their own, reporting requirements, different indicators, different. Everything is different and it's completely varying, and sometimes it becomes confusing. There are also aspects of of data. Data rights. You find in some subsidy programs, you find, they are asking you to take a photo of the beneficiary. This is the beneficiary who has actually purchased the appliance, convincing the beneficiary that they need to have their photo taken to prove that the appliance was sold. And you find these are requirements that keep changing, as the program is being implemented, and there isn't that much transparency. So as the ministry, one of the interventions that we are taking, and through the formation of the Clean Cooking Unit, is to harmonize and standardize, again, these data requirements that and eligibility that is needed for the participation in these programs. One of the things is ensuring that quality assurance is at the beginning, or as the first requirement for the private sector to participate, ensuring that they are complying with the national standards in place. But then now when it comes to the reporting of data, we are developing a centralized system that can enable us to standardize the data that is required, and that can enable us to have the right access to this data. And another thing that we're also looking at is capacity building. We have companies that have not really participated in programs that require them to provide data to this extent and to this magnitude. Sometimes companies might need to onboard additional staff. That also brings additional operational costs in order to comply with the requirements of, again, the data requirements. So what we are doing is to build capacity. And so we also always require that most of these programs have a business development component to it, so that you're integrating all these aspects of, record management, data, reporting, the value of marketing and continuous, record keeping, and how that, positions you for the next big assignment in future. But also ensuring that, while these companies do reporting, I believe, participating in a subsidy program, prepares you to participate in a carbon financing intervention where the data requirements are even more stringent. But also, given that, there's a cost attached to, again, reporting as a requirement of the company or of the program that is, implementing the subsidy program, it's then important that we consider could we also embed some data reporting costs or incentive into the design of the DSS? Of course, not to spoon feed a lot, but to recognize that, this is a new, adding a new layer to what the company is already doing. But it's important that we also standardize the time, and you rightly mentioned it, my colleague from Malawi. It's important that we also standardize, and this is a role that governments can play in terms of regulating what's happening in the implementation of these subsidies. Who sets the rules for the 60 days? What informed the need to verify and ensure that the payments are done within 60 days? Who is following up with the program implementers? Because you're holding somebody's, their liquidity is being affected because the operational funds are being held. Who is holding you responsible and accountable for that? It's important that we also look to that and also, police the implementation of these programs. Of course, we've not seen this with this program in particular, but we've seen a number of other programs where, we have the private sector is telling us, I've not yet been paid over a period of 6 months. I now don't have operating capital. I want to, I had estimated to sell this bulk within this time, but without a subsidy, I probably would have sold it in 2 months. With a subsidy, I could have sold it in a month. But now what I have sold has not been paid, and it's now 6 months. That's even worse than what I was starting off with. So how can we, they are reaching out to us as the government to help, sort out the program. So, the problem. So what we are also doing as a deliberate intervention is to study the impact of the subsidies. Are they growing the market, or are they frustrating the market? The companies that started at a high, at a certain level and participated in this program, are we seeing, any growth? What is the limitation, and what can we do as government to then, facilitate the process? How can we do, policing of the programs that even as we are implementing, but also, building and hand-holding the private sector to do the continuous data reporting and ensuring that, they can continuously participate in the program. Those are the lessons that we've learned. And even when our partners, the donors, are implementing these programs, we can't stay on the sidelines. It's important that we're involved in the design, but do the continuous monitoring and continuous, feedback loop to ensure that each and every person participating in the program, that is the final beneficiary, but also the private sector company, and also the DSS program or the subsidy program is satisfied and is achieving the objectives of the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justine. I look at the time, so we swiftly move over to the third and last key lesson learned. I would like to ask my panelists to be brief. So we've seen that lowering the price alone does not encourage uptake and adoption. So what does turn, what is needed for adoption? Gift. What actually convinces a household to buy a cookstove?
So that's a good one. There are several things, but what we found that convinced the households was basically the fuel savings that they'll make when they adopt this improved cookstove. So a lot of the households that we worked with, their interest was to save on the fuel. And for them, those savings would be channeled to other aspects of the household and improve their livelihood in general. But also, the other driver was the subsidy itself. So we cannot shy away from that fact, because it made the cookstove affordable now to some of the households that otherwise wouldn't afford. But also because it made it affordable to a good number of people in the communities, there was a buzz around it. So it also kind of increased our own other regular sales to other clients that were not eligible, who were ineligible in the program. So for us, I think the number one thing was the fuel savings, the money that they will save there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gift. And Maralitza, from the program design perspective, How did you incorporate from affordability to adoption?
What country saying no in job?
We're not. In the end, they couldn't make it.
Thank
That's
you,
somebody else
Muta.
then, Mada. Thanks. Go ahead, Mada.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Muta. From our side, still riding on the point which Gift shared, fuel savings and also reduced smoke. With fuel savings often interpreted in terms of reduced time, because firewood is often sourced with households moving longer distances collecting the fuel. So with reduced time and also cost and distance required to collect firewood, that was bundled together in the fuel savings and also reduced smoke. So this was particularly relevant in rural settings where households face efforts in sourcing the biomass fuel. So adding to the same, many households were not initially considering improved cook stoves, that I must also stress, as they were generally comfortable with the traditional three-stone fire and did not rather perceive an immediate need to switch. So as a result, the awareness raising, the campaigns created the demand for the purchase of the improved cook stoves, and as also highlighted by Gift, we've also noted a spillover effect where now products were then, with the awareness raising of fuel saving and also reduced smoke, healthy impacts and stuff like those, we've seen that we've also created demand to households that were not targeted under the pilot, those that are in the upper bounds of the Malawi social registry. So in general, awareness contributed to uptake among non-targeted households as well, indicated that there is demand for the products. Yeah, so awareness raising, but particularly around fuel savings, healthy impacts, reduced smoke, all these bundled together, households were then convinced to say, okay, this is a product to go for, compared to continuing with traditional three-stone fire, which has many heavy hazards. So that was it from Malawi.
Thank you, Mada. Thanks a lot. And Justine, in Uganda, the Demand-Side Subsidy program included, next to improved cook stoves, also tier 3 modern cook stoves and higher tier electric pressure cookers and ethanol stoves. And there was quite a high demand on those stoves, mainly by the host communities, but also a bit by refugees. So from a policy perspective, how should future clean cooking subsidies respond if customers show stronger demand for the higher tier or more aspirational products?
Yes, and indeed that's what we want, and that's what mirrors our plans for energy transition, where we want to achieve universal clean cooking. We want to actually reduce the demand, what you see as a typical cook stove, 2-tier. We want to shift that to now have the higher tier cooking solutions. And again, we are very happy to see the results from this intervention that, the public was more responsive, and especially you're dealing with the refugee host communities and host communities, who are more responsive to these higher tier interventions. But however, what we'd like to see in future, we'd want to now reduce more of the, the lower tier, the firewood, typically best cooking solutions, and push towards, again, the alternatives such as the ethanol and, the pellet-fired higher tier cook stoves, to mention but a few, but also recognizing that those came with a fuel. So designing the subsidy in a way, and I know that's a tricky discussion. At what point do you embed the fuel? How do you win the public? How do you win the beneficiaries of that subsidy? Eventually when you've achieved your targets. But we've seen that it's important that you ensure that, that the fuel availability is there, as you also introduce these new, alternatives, but also, again, working with, we've also seen that whereas the new alternatives are preferred, they come with a relatively higher cost So embedding the subsidy program in a way that you can make, again, introducing pay-go or, hire purchase or installment-based payments to make the payments, more palatable can then increase the demand. And ultimately, as demand builds, as the demand and again the subsidy price becomes closer to the willingness to pay price of the appliance, then what we should do as again government as partners is to do continuous education to the public about the appliances, where to source the appliances from, and also how to use the appliances and put in place an infrastructure, a program for repair and maintenance. I believe that would be what would then take up the adoption of the interventions beyond achieving the targets of the subsidy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That would be the end of the panel discussion and the lessons learned. So I want to thank Justine and Gift and Angel Madalitso a lot for their contributions. There will be a third webinar on the technical insights of the design of a demand-side subsidy closer towards GOGSVA, also based on the learnings from the OCA report on designing subsidies. And there will be more knowledge products with regards on how to design, also specific products with regards to clean cooking. Having said that, I want to give the microphone to Charlie Miller, if he's still around.
Yes, I'm still here. Thank you, Marita.
Fantastic.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm covering for my colleague Ryan Alahi, who unfortunately had to duck out of the second half of this webinar. And it falls to me to close the session and just to sort of synthesize, I think, what we're learning from an ESMAP perspective. I think the first thing that jumps out is that obviously the cookstove sector faces a distinctive set of challenges, and not all of them can be addressed by a well-designed subsidy mechanism. A holistic approach is needed that really addresses all market barriers simultaneously. Three things, I guess, jump out, aligned with those topics that we just ran through. I mean, clearly covering the cost of distribution is critical. Cookstoves, certainly compared to off-grid solar products, are quite bulky and quite heavy. And covering the cost of distribution either through pricing or through subsidy is clearly critical. I think companies, especially smaller companies, need support around data management so that they can participate in digital monitoring, reporting, and verification systems, support to gather data and then to manage it using digital solutions. And I think that need can be met through technical assistance or capacity building interventions that might be one-to-one or in groups, or through sort of targeted small grants that invest in company systems and processes, or through, indeed the provision of content. Toolkits and resources can also play a role here, depending on whether you're going for breadth or depth. Clearly also results-based financing is not going to meet all of their financing needs. I mean, I appreciated the way pre-financing was provided, 30% pre-financing, but in an ideal world that wouldn't be needed because companies would be able to finance their upfront working capital needs through debt. So, and also acknowledging the point that was made repeatedly, I think in both countries, that RBF on its own is not enough for companies to go to local banks and be able to access debt financing. So yeah, we need a kind of a tailored, holistic financing solution, and RBF can certainly be part of that, but there's probably a role for making sure that companies have access to working capital, either through credit lines or through guarantees, and possibly also a role for upfront grants. I mean, if we're working with companies that are not yet mature enough, or technologies that are not yet mature enough to be financed through results-based financing and debt financing, then there could be a role for grants that, as long as there's a clear pathway to commercialization. The last thing that jumps out is this point around awareness and behavior change. I mean, I think the demand is there, but in some sense it's kind of latent because people would want improved cook stoves and clean cooking solutions much more if there was better awareness of the risks of cooking on three-stone fires, the benefits of improved solutions. And, I think in particular, probably the economic benefits would be the key selling point for people. The fact that there's money to be saved would really help to build that willingness to pay. And I guess the final thing that strikes me is the scale. I mean, there's clearly a huge need for these solutions, but progress has been slow. And really figuring out where demand-side subsidies fit within that broader holistic package of support that is needed for both companies and for end users is really critical if we're going to kind of crack the clean cooking challenge, which, as Raihan said at the outset, is more challenging. It's not as straightforward as the off-grid solar sector. So yeah, looking ahead, I mean, I think this work that EnDev has done, I want to say a huge thank you for designing the demand-side subsidies pilots in the way that they were designed, specifically to inform the design of larger government-led, World Bank financed operations. And I think we're taking a lot of learning, particularly around the need for this kind of holistic approach that involves broader market development, that involves technical assistance or capacity building of companies being expected to build the systems and processes to participate in RBF, and that combines, debt and grant funding. And then lots of learnings around the design of the subsidies themselves, around the need to, ensure subsidies sufficient, but also avoid over-subsidization, the need for appropriate targeting mechanisms, and the need to ideally avoid a sort of stop-start approach, if you like, and provide continuity and predictability and stability to companies. So moving forward, we will definitely be, looking to put more effort into finding the right mechanisms to support smaller companies and to provide that holistic package of support that is needed. I would highlight, for example, the Ascent Project Preparation Facility, which is a major new regional technical assistance facility that we're just in the process of launching, and also this question of financing. And I recognize that credit lines have gone down and results-based financing is really the main instrument within our portfolio today, but it's not always the right instrument, and we need to make sure that we're offering that holistic financing solution that meets companies, the full range of companies' needs and the needs of companies at different sizes and maturity. And then I think we don't want to shy away from the kind of question of what tier of cook stove to aim for either. Clearly there are profound benefits to improve cook stoves, but also there's a lot of interest in clean cooking and electric cooking because of the even greater benefits in terms of particularly health and prevention of deforestation, etc. And we just need to acknowledge that is, it's not a purely technical question. There are political considerations involved. And I think our role at ESMAP and as the World Bank is to support governments with making informed political choices around what level of cook stove to aim for, and to provide a meaningful level of service in their energy access programs, whilst also ensuring that any subsidies that are provided are fiscally sustainable, and there's long-term sources of public funding behind them that that can provide that stability and that continuity that companies, and more importantly, the communities currently lacking access really need if we're to drive progress over the long term. So with that, I'd like to thank again the presenters from Malawi and Uganda. It was really a fascinating discussion. I learned a lot, and I think I can speak on behalf of all of us in saying that. And yeah, just to close by reiterating our appreciation to EnDev and I believe the Dutch Foreign Ministry, which supported this project, for structuring it as a learning opportunity to inform those larger scale programs. And we look forward to working with you to carry the lessons from this initiative into the wider World Bank portfolio over the coming months and years. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your attendance and participation. Very much appreciated. Bye-bye.
Thank you.